Well, welcome everybody. My name is Penelope Moon. It's my great pleasure to direct the Center of Teaching and Learning here on the Seattle campus of the University of Washington. I'm also Affiliate Associate Professor of History, and I co-lead the Teaching at UW Network, which is a tri-campus collaboration designed to provide instructors across our three campuses with the best instructional support we can offer. So if you're coming to us from the Tacoma campus, welcome. Or the Bothell campus, we're glad you're here. And the Seattle campus folks, thanks for joining us. All right, well, today's session is going to be about strategies for facilitating dialogue, and I'm going to introduce folks and then get out of the way. And the person who's going to be moderating or facilitating our discussion today is the wonderful Megan Kennedy, who directs the UW Resilience Lab here on the Seattle campus. And this is a lab that works to support mental health and well-being initiatives across the UW, including, I'll note, the Five for Flourishing initiative, which we're going to be talking about in a space similar to this in May, so more about that later. And Megan is just also an all-around good person and a fellow Mariners fan, which makes her one of the things that makes her a good person. She is going to be joined by three wonderful faculty colleagues, our panelists. Menaka Abraham is teaching professor in computer sciences and systems in the School of Engineering and Technology on the Tacoma campus. Yolanda Padilla is associate professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences on the Bothell campus. And Yona Sipos is associate teaching professor, Food Systems, Nutrition, and Health program in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences on the Seattle campus. So I'll turn it over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Pen, and thanks just to the Center for Teaching and Learning for being such awesome partners in this work. It's a delight to be here, and it's a delight to scroll through the names of participants and to see friends and colleagues. So hello, everyone. So I want to begin by just sharing the briefest of context, which is that the University of Washington has a dialogue initiative, and this initiative was prompted and sponsored by Provost Serio, and is focused on empowering UW students with the tools and mindsets to engage in skilled and productive dialogue across difference. So the initiative is just completing and wrapping up its second year, and we are preparing for the third. One place this initiative can go is to really begin to think about what are not just teaching students, how do we dialogue effectively in spaces like first year, advising and orientation sessions, but also like as students progress through their experience at the UW, how can we as faculty help support students in engaging in healthy and productive dialogue in their classroom? And that requires us thinking about schools and colleges and classroom space, which is a space that I personally love to think about in my work as the director of the Resilience Lab, thinking about what are the conditions that help students dialogue in classroom spaces. And all of you have shown up as leaders, and we're just really appreciative of you being willing to share with us today the best practices that you've been experimenting with in your contexts in Seattle, Bothell, and Tacoma, and helping us learn from you what we might do in those classrooms. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. I know there's many faculty and staff on this call who also have a lot of really wonderful ideas, and I'm just looking forward to starting that exchange through this format today. So we have an hour, a little less now. I have 5 questions that I want to lead with. And my role is just, as I've said to you a few times, to guide us warmly, calmly, efficiently through the questions that are present. So thanks again for being here. And to start, and Yona, we'll start with you. I'm interested in each of you sharing some context. So we heard what your titles are, but like describe the classroom you're in, describe the school and college, the students, what level, what are they studying, and why dialogue matters to you in that particular context. So we'll start with you, Yona, and then Menaka and Yolanda, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Megan, and to everybody who's organized us to all get together and think into dialogue together. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. I'm also really looking forward to hearing from my fellow panelists. So I was going to start maybe with the why, if that's okay, and just jump in with why dialogue really has started to matter increasingly more in my teaching. I've been teaching a large food systems capstone class since 2020. And I actually have introduced more dialogue and dialogic skills into that class based on student requests and what I've seen is, really positive student responses, to the material that I was bringing in. And what I found is that dialogue and the skills that are associated with it really help students to connect classroom learning and the many theoretical frameworks that they encounter in the years leading up to their senior year, in my case, which is when I touch those students. It really helps them to connect that with professional and community complex realities. And so integrating practices in dialogue really can give students the space and the support to practice skills such as active listening, listening for understanding, staying open, staying curious with each other, asking thoughtful questions that help to co-construct meaningful and robust understandings and interpretations of the world. And these skills are essential for addressing those complex problems. And so in my case, that's, those problems are related to food systems, hunger, climate change, inequality, really big, complex problems that don't have a single solution, certainly. And so preparation and practice in dialogue supports the inclusivity that's needed to really bring in diverse vantage points and even disciplines. And in terms of the how, I use dialogue to help my students become open if they're not entering the class that way, and then stay open so that they can better understand complex issues and then contribute better to their solutions. So I've developed a series of class activities, and I'm excited to share a couple of them with you later on today. But these are ones that support self-awareness and intellectual humility and the value of non-absolutist thinking. And it's been great to see them grapple with those concepts and then also give feedback on how they're applying them in their teamwork and then also their community engagement. And so I mentioned the senior level capstone class, and I have in this class senior level students who are in class sizes ranging from about 45 students to 105 with my largest class. So that was maybe a little bit too big. Now I'm teaching this quarter an 80-person capstone class. And in addition to the students having team-based learning and projects that they work on, they're actually projects that have been identified by community leaders. And so with 80 students, I have 8 community partners. And I use these dialogic activities to help students prepare to participate in the community engagement. So I see just a lot of overlap with that. And maybe I'll pause there for now, if that's all right.
Thank you so much, Yona. Yeah, we'll move to Menika, but I cannot imagine inviting students to go into community to do deep service work without these skills and mindsets. So appreciating you preparing them for that piece of like the relational skill building that they need to do. It's wonderful. Menika.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be in this space. And I've been teaching for more than 20 years in computer science, and it's a different. I think all the teaching that I have received as a student has been very lecture centered, very sage on stage kind of teaching. So it is something, Manika always does active learning, right? Manika always does these things, but something that I struggled quite a bit post-pandemic is the student engagement in the classroom. So I have intentionally redesigned my classroom to kind of build that connection. So something that I've done, I did some research because why should we do this? And from observing STEM classrooms and conducting some student focus groups with the STEM students, I found that students want that human connection. They want to engage with the instructors. They want to engage with the peers. And so any small changes we can make, they make a big difference. So I've tried to use those things within my classroom. And so I have students sitting in groups, and I had to do some non-computer sciencey things, such as, and I'll share some of those things that I do shortly, which actually I can tell you my measure of success is that now I have to raise my voice to get my students to stop talking. So that wasn't always true in the days before, in the early days of my teaching. So the dialogue has really changed the whole climate of my classroom. So I can't really go back to the old ways of how I did things. So I'll share a lot more, but I want to give more space for others to talk. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Menika. And it's just already there's 2 for 2 of you who are saying that students are actually asking to engage and to be in dialogue, which is notable for me to hear. Yolanda.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. And I look forward to learning from my peers on the panel today. I teach in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at the Bothell campus, and I primarily teach in our American and Ethnic Studies major and in our Culture, Literature, and the Arts major. I also teach in our first year and pre-major program, and that's the class that I've incorporated constructive dialogue. I've incorporated most extensively in that class. It's a class that I co-teach. So all first year students at UW Bothell are required to take what's known as a Discovery Corps experience class in the autumn. So we get them right as they're starting their college journey. The specific one that I teach is called Place and Displacement in the Americas, and it's capped at 48 students because it's a co-taught class. If I was teaching it by myself, it would be 30 students, but so it's about 48 students. That kind of is nice because I know Yona was saying that was talking about a senior capstone class, so you kind of have both sides of the college journey. And then in terms of the why, I really value that constructive dialogue strategies give students tools that they can use in the classroom and beyond, at home, at work, other spaces. And we talk a lot in education about the value of learning in diverse communities, but that kind of learning is really hard. Dialogue in that kind of diverse learning community has to be taught and practiced. It's certainly not something that I was ever taught. And so I think the hope with teaching or giving students opportunities to learn about and practice constructive dialogue strategies is that when we really listen to people that we disagree with, even about things that we really care about, we can come away with a more nuanced understanding of our own views, at the same time that we kind of value the humanity of the people that we're in dialogue with. So those are some of the things that I value about it.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. The word that's coming up for me as I listen to the 3 of you is around connection, like students feeling more connected to themselves, to the material you're teaching, to each other, to each of you, to the community. Yona, I love, Yolanda, that you added to their families and relationships now, just like to their lives, their whole lives, in addition to being students. And so just appreciating your reasons why this is important to you on each of the campuses and in STEM and in first year and senior level courses. We'll move into the how. I know each of you prepared some slides to show really specifically. That was one of our goals of the session, was to be able to show folks who are here like really concretely what you do so that they could understand in really tangible terms. So let's go in reverse order, starting with you, Yolanda, Menika, Yona. And when you're done, you can just pass it to the next person. I don't need to jump in each time.
Okay, thanks. So I want to start by saying that I'm still very new to building this kind of dialogue into my classes. And I've done it with something called the Perspectives Program, which was created by the Constructive Dialogue Institute and which was introduced on the Bothell campus a few years ago, I think maybe about 3 years ago or so. So I've incorporated the whole program into the first year class that I mentioned, but I've also used discrete exercises from it in other classes with good success. And so just a little bit about the program, it really centers on asking questions and listening deeply. It emphasizes letting go of winning, compassionate curiosity, storytelling, and finding shared ground where possible. So it's not about abandoning your own beliefs, but about trying to listen and to work toward understanding. Before I get to the specific perspectives program, I just wanted to take a moment to say that I do think it's really important to spend time in the first few classes having the students get to know each other, and to do some, I guess I'll call it community building. So I use what's called a conocimiento activity. Conocimiento means knowledge in Spanish. And it's time that students spend in small groups learning about their experiences with family, identity, and educational institutions. With the idea being that we have to have a context for the individuals who make up the classroom community in order to learn from each other. It's a very extended, like I've decided to devote a full hour of class to this because I think it's really important. And it feeds into the constructive dialogue part of the class because students need to see each other as fellow humans in order to learn from each other, not just the person who happens to be sitting next to them. So I always lay that kind of foundation. And then after maybe like in the second week, there's an exercise in the Perspectives program that's called the questions game that I've found helpful in improving the quality of small group work. And part of the reason I value this exercise is that sometimes students will approach the prompts I give to small groups as a task in which they just state what they believe or what they think when it's their turn to talk. And then they feel that they did what they needed to do and they're done. And I understand that because sharing out, even in a small group, can be hard for students. It can be hard for anyone. And it doesn't really occur to them to really be curious about what their peers think and why. And so these are the kinds of things that I think need to be taught and practiced. So I'm going to share my screen. And then I'm just going to put this. I should have done this. Okay, sorry, how can, oh, it's up here, I see, okay. All right, that is a typical thing that happens in my classroom, okay. Okay, so this is just a screenshot from the Constructive Dialogue Institute of the Questions game. And so it has you start by having students do a silent brainstorm where they think about a political issue, a value, or opinion that they hold and care about. I actually have them do this as homework because I think it's hard on the spot to think about like an appropriate thing that you care about that you want to bring to the classroom. And then I put them into pairs. And just as it describes here, the first person in the pair will share a political opinion, a value, or that stance that they care about. And then the second person will ask follow-up questions. And that's all they're doing. They're not talking about what they feel or what their opinion is on it. They're really just asking questions to the first person. And then the person one responds to those questions. And then after they've done that, they switch roles. And I have them try to come up with questions on their own, but I do walk around, and if I see or hear a pair who's struggling, I'll give them what I call this cheat sheet of questions, which also comes from the Perspectives program. And so these are just some questions that they provide as samples for students to use. And even if they just go straight down the line and just ask these questions, I'm okay with that because the idea is it's about them practicing listening and starting the process of cultivating curiosity as a habit of mind. And then I have them write for a few moments in response to these debrief questions, and then we talk about them as a class. So I use this exercise as it is a couple of times early in the quarter, and then implement it in small group discussions that engage course content more directly. And what I value in it, I mean, I think it seems really simple, but it's a practicing of curiosity and of asking questions as a necessary part of having a constructive dialogue. So really just kind of getting students in the habit of kind of wanting to know what their peers think and why they think it. I pulled out just a couple of excerpts from students after they did the exercise, or I have them do writing after all of these. Okay, I don't think I'm going to be able to. Oh, it's kind of half blocked off for me. But this student, okay, so this is the first student. So this student was very, very enthusiastic about the whole program, and said that she really appreciated the way it really had her focus on being conscious about the difference between either or thinking and both and thinking, and about the idea of trying to find some kind of shared common ground, even with someone who you just didn't think that you would ever be able to find that, because at least on a surface level, you just seemed so far apart. And so she valued that it allowed her to kind of keep an open mind during a discussion. And then the second student, she titled her essay Understanding First, Reacting Later. And she talks about how she would always go into difficult conversations with a warrior mindset, like the idea that she just needed to, this was an argument that she was just going to win it, which is very common. I mean, I tell students that I have all of the same kinds of areas that I need to grow in as well, and that's certainly one of them. And so she gives a specific example of a small group work where they were talking about climate change, and one student just made a comment that she just thought was too general, and I think she would have discounted. But she kind of asked a question instead, where she showed some curiosity about where that's her peers' perspective came from, and then she talks about how that question made the conversation more productive. And that the group member took the opportunity to share a personal story, which is something that's really emphasized in the program, like storytelling, and how it kind of let her let go of the winning mindset and instead be kind of more thoughtful, and ultimately, like, hopefully have some kind of connection, rather than just kind of overwhelming tension. So those are just two examples. And I'll also add that while the questions game is focused on cultivating curiosity, it also forces students to think more deeply and reflect on why they hold certain opinions or why certain things matter to them. And ideally, that can lead to students becoming more effective advocates for their own views and more compassionate interlocutors at the same time. So that's the exercise that I wanted to share.
Thank you, Yolanda. I feel like that's so needed in the classroom. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because I feel like I want to do some of that. So thank you. So I think there's not a lot of room in STEM classes, and most instructors are thinking, oh, we got all this content to get through, right? So I have switched to using a flipped classroom model in the last few years, and this quarter I'm actually doing an optional lecture, and some students are actually showing up, which is interesting. I'm always experimenting. So something that I've started doing in my classrooms is I have students sit in groups, so it's tables of 4. And I randomly pair students every session. So there's problem solving, right? So they come prepared, they either come to the Monday lecture or come prepared by watching the videos that I posted, and then we do some problem solving in the classroom. So, and I walk around and we talk about any problems. So it's very, STEM centric, right? So what I've done a little bit different is I started because the students are meeting someone new each time, I have a little slide, right? So they actually have some directions as they walk into the classroom. And I'll share the slide shortly. So initially, I was doing random pairs, and so I would have two students sit next to each other. And otherwise, what do we do? We try to gravitate to the person that we know and we sit with them, right? So that's how we are, humans are. So the students told me it was really very awkward because they are meeting someone new. And if their pair member doesn't show up, then they're also left alone. And then I usually pair them with someone else, right? So that's what I was doing. So they want to be seated in tables of 4. So this is actually feedback from them. So instead of doing the 2, so I still randomly pair them, but they're sitting with 4 people. So to make it a bit easier to have that conversation. Of course, we spend the first 5 minutes of the class. Actually, I get there early, so the tables are already set up in such a way, right? So I started the classroom with this little slide that I will share. It's nothing really different, right? So they have to find their group number, right? Sometimes you have this odd number classes, right? Then you end up with not pairs, but 3 people. So that's why it's called group number. And then they have to do this. They have to introduce themselves and explain how to pronounce their name if it's an odd pronunciation like my name, right? So some discussion questions, and I had to be very creative about this and find different discussion questions. So this was how many hours of sleep did you get last night? This actually gets them going and talking about sleep. Another question that I asked recently was, do you like rain or the sun, right? So you'll be surprised that there are some people like me who actually like rain. So it actually starts some conversations on different things. And I've done some deeper conversations. I have posted a little YouTube video on intersectionality, which takes like 4 or 5 minutes. I showed it. And this is not a topic I would have felt comfortable talking about maybe 5-10 years ago. But I showed that video and I talked about my intersectionality. Because of the diverse students that we have in the classroom, they actually said they felt very comfortable in the classroom because there's not a lot of female students in our computer science classroom. So kind of, I'm trying to venture out. It is not an easy thing to do this kind of work. I feel like what Yolanda has shown, it's very natural to have that kind of discussion-oriented things in humanities or social sciences, but doing that in STEM spaces sometimes is not the easiest thing, and we're not always trained to do this kind of work. But I'm interested in exploring CDI to kind of see how some of those things can be incorporated in the classroom, because we're not just about building computer scientists, right? We need to actually cultivate their critical thinking and how they can survive in this world. I won't say the word. I feel like anytime 2 instructors are together, we say the AI word, right? So, but how do we move forward, right? So anyway, I will stop there. So thank you.
Thank you both. Those are such great examples. And actually, I already have questions that I'm going to ask you probably afterwards about how I might incorporate some of those strategies into my capstone class. And I love hearing about what you're introducing in the first year space and in STEM. And so I didn't mention at the beginning that the food systems program at UW Seattle is in the School of Public Health. So in some ways, it's a mix between your 2 disciplines, right? Very STEM and also very people-centered and community-centered and community-connected. So it is a fertile space to bring dialogue, I think, and to bring these concepts and skills into the classroom. And so I mentioned before that I have a series of activities that I introduce that are really meant to prepare students for this capstone experience of working in a team and with a community partner on a community identified problem or opportunity. And in order to prepare the students for both conversations and kind of decision making, right? Which is the really challenging part of a lot of conversations, is like, how do we move from just sharing ideas to actually reaching that understanding and maybe even some integration of our different perspectives? Then I have found the concept of intellectual humility to be really invaluable. And so I introduce early on 2 activities under this frame and call it a, kind of framings for engagement. And so I will share my screen and show you a couple of examples, and I'll move through them pretty quickly, but I will say that I've been experimenting, as Megan said at the beginning, very much in an experimental phase and responding to what students were asking for, which was more opportunities to really be able to have discussions across differences and to not just jump to a kind of false or superficial agreement or to walk away from difficult conversations or disagreement, but to actually be able to talk across difference and to also collaborate with community partners who might see the world very differently, and to do so in ways that were really productive, and so that students could be both empowered but also aware of their role as students and their role as learner, right? Which is something that I feel a great responsibility to emphasize to them. And so the first frame that I was going to share with you all is one that I actually pulled from improv, and so from improvisational comedy, and it's the term yes and it's a really foundational framing that's used to collaboratively build a scene. And so what I have the students do instead is look at this kind of simple, seemingly simple line diagram. And then, I don't know why this isn't, oh, here it is. And then have students in their small groups of 4 or 5 assign different roles. So different perspectives that one might bring to describing this scene. And so, we give examples like somebody can be a sociologist and somebody can be a farmer and somebody can be an ecologist. And how would you, from those different perspectives and from those different frames of reference, describe this scene? And then what the students get to pretty quickly usually is that it's almost impossible to describe the whole scene at once. And so it's easier to have a frame of reference that we're starting from. And that framing allows us to bring to the foreground kind of what's most important to us, but it doesn't at all describe the full complexity of this scenario. And so it's only through a collaborative, constructive dialogic process that we're able to co-construct a better understanding of this more, somewhat complex scenario. And so then we have a series of discussion and reflection questions that we work through, the students work through in their small teams, and then as a class, where we think about like what's the value of bringing multiple perspectives, what are the challenges, and then it was really interesting to hear the kind of yes and or both and either or thinking. We do a comparison of that as well, and then think about yes and framing and how that might be helpful in terms of collaborating and learning from community leaders, and also how it might relate to other contexts in their life. And so the other example I wanted to share was another framing for intellectual humility and for engagement with team and community-based learning, and that is this idea of non-absolutism. And so this is based on an ancient story, actually. Many of us are familiar with the story, have heard of it, but I only learned more recently that it is a story from the 5th century BCE, before the Common Era. And it's this incredible story about the seemingly very simple, where there are 6 visually impaired people, or 6 blind men, as the traditional story goes, who encounter an elephant for the first time, and they're each describing it from their own perspective. And so the person at the tail says, oh, the elephant is like a rope. And the person at the legs of the elephant says, no, the elephant is like a tree, or, by the tusks, no, an elephant is like a spear, right? And so they're arguing with one another until somebody who is able to see the elephant can explain to them that each of them is correct, but it's only when they're all putting the story together that they can actually describe the elephant in more correctly and more truthfully. And so the story allows us to talk about the idea of many-sidedness and even this doctrine of non-absolutism, and the potential of, if not accepting, being able to hold multiple diverse and even contradictory viewpoints. And so again, there's some reflective questions that I introduced to the students about where a non-absolutist perspective could be valuable. And what I've heard from students is that they really see the value of these concepts for both teamwork and community engaged work. And I feel almost like a breath of relief in the class from a lot of students where they say, I don't need to have all the answers. In fact, I can't have all the answers. And a big part of my role in this space is to really learn from others. And that can open the door or enable collaboration and reduce conflict and diverse ideas. And really recognizing the value of different backgrounds and different perspectives, and learning the skills to go through even conversations where there's quite a bit of disagreement. So those are two of the examples that I have developed with my students, also through feedback with them, and I have found them, and they seem to be finding them helpful to set up what the kind of application of those concepts are in the context of their capstone.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. I want to quickly just summarize a few things that I'm hearing in common with all of you. The first being just the importance of this foundation of student relationship. Like, we're here today to talk about dialogue, and what I hear all of you talking about is creating strong relationships between students, and that relationship capital being what helps them be able to then practice some of these other concepts that you're describing, like curiosity and perspective taking, being on the balcony. And so I'm really appreciating the investment of class time that you're putting into relationship, because sometimes people in a work setting or in a classroom setting don't think that that's actually the work, that that's like time that's not useful. But what I'm hearing all of you say is, no, there's actually a value in students having a relationship with each other so that they can dialogue, so that they can then solve complex challenges in our community, work on complex problems in STEM, and so on and so forth. The other thing I heard many of you describe is how you bring yourself in really like meaningful and deliberate ways to that. So Yolanda, I was just loving you being like, I tell them that I'm working on this stuff too, and I just found that comment to be something that you said subtly. And I'm like, no, that's so meaningful that you're bringing yourself in that really like kind of humble, that kind of humility way. And I'm thirdly just want to say that I appreciate that you're giving them guidance and scaffolding for the practice. And Yolanda, you use the word, so curiosity becomes a habit. And I'm like, and maybe even it becomes a value. Like it's cool that you just are like, not just a one and done, but that this is something you're doing over and over again in the class, so that it's just a way of being a UW student in the respective spaces that you're leading. So really moved. And there was a question around, will all of these resources that you're sharing and ideas be shared? The answer is yes. So for those participants listening, that's a yes. There's another question around, why do I keep saying being on the balcony? I'm using adaptive leadership language to mean like being able to see things from a wider perspective, like widening the aperture to take in more information, as opposed to being like really zoomed in on only one perspective or specifically your own point of view. I want to move to questions around like scaling and assessment. Let's start with assessment. I've seen in your slides, there's a lot of feedback loops. Students are telling you they want this. Students are telling you it's great. Can you talk more about assessment? Like, what's working with assessment? What are you doing, and where there might be areas for growth? Why don't we go with Yolanda, Yona, Menika, whoever has something to say around that?
Yeah, so if you use the Constructive Dialogue Institute program, it has they do modules, and it has built-in quizzes in the modules. But I think it's kind of easy to game it on the platform, and it's super important that the students do these modules. So I have quizzes that I've created, but I also just spend a lot of time having them do, or not spend a lot of time, but have them do quite a lot of reflection. So they reflect after we do any of these exercises in class, and then at the end of the quarter, I have them write a longer essay where they draw specific examples that happened from their interactions with their peers, and talk about ways in which they grew through this program, and give me evidence from the dialogues that they actually had. So that's I'm definitely still developing this, and I want to kind of I want to have like more kind of imaginative assessment, but that's what I have so far. And the longer essay at the end, drawing from the exercises, it's good for now, I think.
Yeah, I use some similar strategies, and I'll just speak about the pre and post reflective writing that I bring into the class. And so, after some of the foundational concepts and skill building that we do, as students are getting into their teams and kind of have their projects for the quarter, then they do a kind of pre-engagement reflective paper where they're bringing in the kind of skills that we've been working on, and looking at the literature as well, and then preparing for that process, and then a kind of summative paper at the end where it's a variation of the what, so what, and now what framing for a reflective paper, where they kind of go through what they learned and what skills they implemented, how they've grown, and so what are they going to do with that learning, and what comes next for them as they continue to apply these skills. And that, I think, just is so helpful for me to get these rich insights into where they're coming from, and then how they've traveled through the quarter and the experience.
I'll also share that. So they do the introduction as I was talking about, and so the random pairings actually means that the work that they do, so I call it a lab, but there's a part A, they do it in class. The part B, they still have to collaborate with the same partner to submit it. So the interaction continues beyond that, that 2 hour class duration. So they actually so they get to do this with, multiple students over the quarter. So hoping that it builds friendships and connections and networks.
Before we begin to transition to the questions that are starting to come in, which is exciting to see, I'm curious, do you have any thoughts about scaling? I heard from you that your classes range from like 30, 40 students to 80, 100. And I'm wondering about folks who might be on the call who are teaching some of our largest enrollment courses that may be, online, not in person, not where you can move the tables at the beginning of class and set it for them. Any thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been lucky. So I teach at UW Tacoma. So my largest class was 70, which I know Seattle people, which I found hard. 70 is really hard. But I still use Think, Pair, Share. I still did the random pairing. I didn't do the groups because I was stuck in an auditorium style class. But I used Poll Everywhere. I used Mentimeter, Share Documents, Jamboards, whatever I can, every tool that I can to kind of have that collaboration. I love teaching in classrooms with movable furniture so that but it can't always happen, right? I actually timed it. It takes about 4 minutes if the students help you to set up or tear down the classroom setup. I have also used my grader when I got a grader or a GTA on that rare occasions to actually help with the classroom sessions. I need their help more for this than the grading, because it helps build that classroom environment where students want to be there, right? So there are creative ways of doing this, but I know it's 70, which is a large size, right? So maybe that is one way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. But just want to express my gratitude for all of you and the way that you're teaching our students at the UW and with so much care and so much humility and so much creativity. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you to all our panelists, to Megan, and to our captioner. Everybody, have a good day and go Mariners.